April marks National Financial Literacy Month, and in the year of 2024, it comes amid challenging times, including the cost of living that is soaring. It's also seeing changes in the dynamics of priority spending and money management. Analysts say the focus should be on consumers evaluating their finances and learning new money management skills as well as tactics. Consumer Engagement Manager at Hollard Life Solutions, Reuben Oosthuysen, speaks to us about this now. Thank you so much for your time, Reuben. I think let's first start by understanding what periodic data has been telling us in South Africa where the consumer is concerned, financial literacy, competency levels and avenues that are available to ease the burden of financial pressure.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I think, first of all, just to speak generally as a life insurer, we can see that there's a significant trend of about 80% of South Africans being underinsured, with really only about 10% of South Africans having something like a comprehensive life cover in place. So I think that speaks already to the sort of level of financial literacy in so many consumers being, most often unknowns to them, exposed to significant financial risk or shock. And I think even when you compare South Africa from a savings perspective and so on to the rest of the BRICS nations, even there, I think we are not performing ideally as where we would like to be.
And the product that you've just mentioned, where life cover is a reference point, there it speaks to unforeseen circumstances or an eventuality that, would be part of anyone's life. And I'm interested in finding out how the current climate then speaks volumes about planning for those unforeseen circumstances. Where does one even start, given the immediate priorities that may overshadow long-term planning?
Excellent question. I think we talk about long-term planning and we sort of talk about exposure to financial risk. And I think one of the most key things to think about is that ultimately our most valued asset is our ability to work and to earn an income. So I think this sort of my thinking around this kind of question is always to say we have to think about protecting our income and our ability to continue earning. So when you look at like a comprehensive life cover, that's where you kind of find an income protection specifically in the form of disability cover and critical illness cover, that were you to be unable to work as a result of an illness or incurring a disability, your income would still be protected, because at the end of the day, our sort of month-to-month expenses, our long-term financial goals, our retirement plans, etc., for most South Africans rely on something like a salary, and it's so integral to protect that.
Are we then seeing an increase in the offerings such as income protection and those vehicles that would be used as a buffer, as you rightfully just alluded to a short while ago?
Absolutely. What I can definitely tell you is that from a conversational perspective around social media, around sort of different call centers, etc., there's definitely a very notable uptake in consumer interest in these types of products. What we are seeing is that insurers are treating this quite differently. So some insurers have this as an income protection as a standalone product. So I think that's important to mention, is that this could be as part of a larger comprehensive more comprehensive underwritten life product where you could get all kinds of different benefits, but it could also be standalone. So I think it's important for consumers to understand that these types of products are considered quite differently under different insurers. So it would be really important to sit down with an insurer or with a broker or advisor and ultimately find the type of product that best suits your needs.
Going back to the immediacy of priorities, especially in a strained environment such as the current economic climate that we find ourselves in, Reuben, products such as these tend to be grudge purchases if one is squeezed for money. What do we say around making sure that there is at least a little bit that you are putting into some sort of a kitty to provide for the unforeseen, but at the same time balancing that with how immediate one's financial priorities might be? Because we've seen in the recent household survey that spending is dwindling and the budgets of households are in South Africa, going to almost zero, where you have to debate whether you're buying bread or you're looking at a long-term plan of investing and cushioning and creating a buffer financially for yourself.
Absolutely. Great question. I think we definitely cannot be unaware of the sort of continued cost of living increase, and the reality is that a lot of South African consumers, in trying to sort of make that ends meet, are exactly as you say, looking to grudge purchases to kind of reduce the strain on their budgets. And often that grudge purchase takes the form of insurance. We see a high rate of cancellations. I mean, in 2023, virtually a few billion rands worth of cover lapsed, and as a result of non-payment and sort of cancellation of policies. And that's a significant amount. And I think what that speaks to is to say that a lot of consumers are looking at their premium cost and going, is this still worth it? Does this still make sense to keep? And the irony of challenging financial economic times is that, it's already challenging in these kinds of contexts to recover from financial shocks. So whether to be unexpected expenses, perhaps income disruptions, it is now even more significantly challenging. And, we originally take out insurance cover policies as a safety net. And in cancelling that completely, we sort of entirely remove that safety net, exposing ourselves to that financial shock, which could then lead us, ironically, to exhaust, dip into savings and sort of push even further out some of those saving goals that we have. So I think it's so important to realize that, keep cover, albeit in some way, shape or form. There are many strategies we can talk about reducing your monthly premium, but retaining some cover. So although your safety net could look a little bit different, you could still retain your safety net. And as you say, when you have to make those tough financial decisions, at least were something to happen, you would still be protected and you would not be in a worse off situation.
Now, how would you say this to a younger economic participant in this country, looking at the dynamics of COVID-19, where a number of lessons were learned in terms of creating those safety nets, but to a newcomer within the economic landscape of the country? They may not be thinking 20, 30 years later, but the current economic climate is essentially saying, if you had not prepared for a tough economic time, then you find yourself wanting.
Absolutely. I think a harsh reality that a lot of South Africans learned, and we can see this in a lot of polls, is that not having something as the sort of key cornerstone of financial management in place, which is just a budget, understanding what your expenses look like. So I think that's the first key thing. That's a real lesson to learn with your first paycheck. I think secondly is to set those clear financial goals, because that sort of ensures that all of your decisions are aligning in that direction, also gives you something to measure your progress towards. And I think we have to also talk about building emergency funds. I think in this conversation we've had a theme about savings, and we don't necessarily talk about how are we going to protect our savings. And how we're going to protect our ability to earn an income. So it's really important to then kind of lean into insurance and insurance policies to kind of go, well, how do I protect my savings and the likes of sort of an income protection and so on, and as long as your ability to earn? Because I think we saw in COVID with significant disruptions in income and a number of South Africans unfortunately losing their incomes entirely. How do you, for all those kinds of planned eventualities, how do you ensure that you would still be able to take care of yourself as well as those loved ones that might be dependent on you?
As a parting shot, is South Africa making progress in breaching the divide of financial literacy and the tangibility of how one dispenses their income?
You ask my opinion? Absolutely. I can tell you that a lot of insurers across the entire financial services provider world are spending quite a lot of time, effort, and sort of investment in ensuring that financial services products are easier to understand, easier to work with, needs analysis are easier to complete, products are easier to engage with, easier to make changes, and sort of more so aligned to the consumer need as well as their budget. And I think there's also a lot of investment to make sure that consumers are ultimately able to engage with these kinds of things through the likes of brokers and sort of and so on and so on. And so I think absolutely, are we making progress? Yes. Although it is still Financial Literacy Month in April, so it's so important to sit down and review your finances every year. Make sure that you're on top of these kinds of decisions.
Reuben Oosthuysen from Hollard Live talking to us about April being the month of financial literacy.